They said she'd never be queen. Yet Camilla sits beside King Charles as the House of Windsor strains. In interviews around Spare, Prince Harry alleges his stepmother helped fuel what he calls the monarchy's unraveling. Survivor of scandal or quiet architect of the damage? Tonight we lift the veil on alliances, leaks, and loyalties. This is She Destroyed Us. Prince Harry's shocking confession about Camilla. The confession didn't arrive as a tabloid leak or a palace press note. It came from Harry himself, deliberate, measured, and sharpened by years of watching the same patterns repeat. He didn't couch it in palace language. He didn't hide behind no comment. He said, in essence, that Camilla wasn't just a survivor of scandal. In his view, she was a player in the slow unraveling of the family he once called home. To understand why those words landed like a thunderclap, you have to trace the line back to Harry's childhood. He grew up with a wound that never truly healed. Diana's isolation, the humiliation of a marriage talked about like a soap opera. The third person who would not leave the frame. For Harry, that third person wasn't an abstract headline. It was a face at family events, a presence in rooms where his mother's name hung like glass. Years later, as an adult, he didn't just revisit those memories, he reinterpreted them. He began to connect his mother's pain to the machinery around the throne, courtiers, editors, sources close to, and the careful rebranding that can turn a scandal into a soft-focus redemption arc. In interviews and in his own words, he framed Camilla as someone who, over time, learned how to work that machinery for survival. That's his claim, his lens, and it's the lens through which he now reads everything. According to Harry, reputation inside the royal world isn't only earned, it's traded. Favors for favorable coverage, access for a kinder headline. Rumors suggest he believes deals were cut in back rooms and over phones, with relationships built not just to protect the crown, but to protect specific people at specific times. Reports claim he saw patterns. When a flattering piece ran here, a hostile piece appeared there, especially when his own life gave the press an easier target. It's not that he pretends to be perfect. Harry owns his missteps, but he draws a hard line at what he calls the sacrifice. In his telling, he and Meghan were offered up to the media cycle. Stories shaped, narratives hardened, so that others might enjoy smoother sailing. He points to Camilla's long road from other woman to accepted royal as Exhibit A in how the institution can bend public sentiment when it chooses to. What makes his confession explosive isn't just the accusation, it's the implication. If Camilla's rise required constant image work, and if that image work required feeding the beast, then the family's unity wasn't broken by outsiders. It was traded away from within. That's the story Harry says he lived. That's the charge he places at the feet of the stepmother the state now calls Queen. Palace veterans would dispute his interpretation. They'd say the crown has always engaged with the press to keep the ship steady, and that every senior royal, Harry included, benefits from that engagement. Royal watchers argue Harry's view is shaped by grief as much as fact. But even his critics admit the power of his testimony. It reveals the human cost of public relations in a house that survives on image. Harry's words don't end with Camilla alone. They point upward and outward, toward an institution that, in his eyes, chose presentation over protection, optics over honesty. He is careful to name the system, not just the person. Still, the headline is unavoidable. He believes Camilla's ascent is tied to the family's descent. And once he said it out loud, there was no returning to business as usual. But if Camilla's image didn't simply heal on its own, who authorized the risk? Who decided the crown could weather the storm? To answer that, you have to look past the courtiers and toward the only figure powerful enough to change the script. The Queen's gamble on Camilla's acceptance. For years after Diana's passing, Camilla hovered at the edge of public life. a presence carefully managed, a name that could still turn headlines sharp. The late Queen understood the danger. She knew that public trust is the monarchy's oxygen, and that a misstep with Camilla might drain the room. So for a long time, the signal from the top was restraint. Proceed slowly, test the water, avoid triumphalism at all costs. Time, however, is one of the Crown's oldest weapons. As the years moved on, the rawest edges dulled. Camilla's appearances grew more intentional. Charitable events, lighter moments, causes without sharp politics. Gradually, the framing shifted from scandal to stability, from interloper to companion. None of this happened by accident. It was a strategy of inches, not miles, a bet that consistency would outlast outrage. The decisive turn came when the Queen, with her unmatched feel for national mood and constitutional continuity, signaled acceptance. That message didn't just bless a marriage. It set the course for a reign. With one gesture, the sovereign told the country and the Commonwealth how to read the future. Charles would be king, and Camilla would stand beside him. It was, by any measure, a monumental institutional choice. Why make it? The calculation was cold and clear. A monarch must leave a stable runway. The Queen's duty was not only to embody the present, but to safeguard the next chapter. Endorsing Camilla was, in effect, endorsing continuity. A partner who steadied Charles, a consort who could carry the obligations without demanding the spotlight. A narrative that could be explained with simple words: commitment, service, forgiveness. In public, the move looked tidy. In private, the cost would be paid by those asked to reconcile duty with personal history. William, raised for the role, could fold acceptance into his sense of service. For Harry, it touched a nerve that never stopped firing. From his vantage point, the endorsement didn't merely bless a marriage. It rewrote a legacy. It placed a royal seal on a past that had shattered his mother and asked him to nod along. The Queen's decision wasn't naive. She had weathered abdication, aftershocks, family crises, and culture shifts for decades. She knew the Crown must adapt or calcify. Her gamble was that the public would reward steadiness, that time plus consistent service could transmute resentment into reluctant respect. In many ways, she was right. The furor softened. Ceremonies proceeded. The machine kept moving. But gambles have side effects. As Camilla's status rose from tolerated to entrenched, the family's old fracture lines became fault lines. The late Queen's choice protected the institution at altitude, even as it pressed on bruises closer to the ground. To admirers, that's what leadership requires. To Harry, it felt like a trade he never consented to. Continuity purchased with silence about wounds that shaped his life. Here is where two truths collide. The Queen safeguarded the crown for the many. Harry guarded the memory of one. Both claims hold a kind of moral weight, but only one could dictate policy. The sovereign chose the course that kept the ship upright. Harry refuses to pretend that the water below is calm. And that brings us to the engine room, the place where acceptance is sold to the public, where narratives harden, and where winners and losers are chosen by column inches. If the Queen's gamble set the direction, the press would determine whether the country followed. The media's role in shaping Camilla's image, the comeback didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, methodical, and, if you believe Harry, greased by a constant exchange of access for advantage. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the public was still raw from Diana's story, and Camilla's name could turn a headline into a lightning strike. The response, according to royal watchers, was a slow burn strategy. Fewer sharp edges, more everyday causes, soft focus events, and careful spacing between appearances. Each step was small enough not to provoke outrage, but steady enough to build familiarity. Familiarity, then acceptance. Acceptance, eventually a crown. Editors didn't wake up and change their minds on their own. The narrative tilted through the channels that have always moved stories in royal London. Friends, senior sources, and quiet calls at the right hour. Reports claim that the palace's media operation, across multiple reigns and principles, treated influence like a currency. Leaks, clarifications, and background in exchange for kinder framing tomorrow. In that economy, a single flattering profile could be balanced by a harsher piece about someone else. Harry's allegation is blunt. The Ledger favored Camilla. He believes glowing copy about her came with a shadow somewhere else, often over him and Meghan. To be fair, this is not unique to one royal. Every senior figure has relied on the press at some point, and the press has relied on them. The difference, Harry argues, is intent. He claims Camilla learned to play the game so precisely that she turned reputation into armor. The image of the other woman was recut into the image of the steady partner, then into indispensable consort. Charities helped. Humor helped. Time helped most of all. Each photo op seemed less like a provocation and more like proof that the storm had passed. But storms don't pass for everyone at the same time. When Meghan entered the family, coverage became a battleground of contrasts. Camilla's decades-long rehabilitation stood beside Meghan's rapid-fire scrutiny. Side-by-side headlines did the heavy lifting. Camilla, grounded. Meghan, difficult. Camilla, private. Meghan, calculating. Whether that was coordination or coincidence depends on who you ask, but the effect was unmistakable. The public was asked to see one woman as the fruit of patience and compromise, and the other as a disruption that needed taming. The press, meanwhile, fed on division. Outlets that had once punished Camilla now found appetite for redemption arcs. Those same outlets discovered that criticism of Meghan guaranteed clicks at scale. Add to that the perennial heir versus spare framing, and you get a perfect media engine. A steady heroine versus a lightning rod newcomer. The obedient future king versus the outspoken younger brother. The story practically wrote itself, and it sold. Harry's indictment of this system isn't subtle. He says the institution outsourced its soul to headlines, trading candor for choreography. His critics counter that everyone in public life must manage perception. To survive at that altitude, you either engage the press or you get crushed by it. Both statements can be true, but only one explains the bitterness in Harry's voice. He believes the rehab of Camilla's image didn't simply happen around him, it happened over him. If that is the bargain, it leaves a mark on more than reputations. It strains the family that has to live under the result. You can't run a redemption arc for one person without creating a counter-story for someone else. And inside the palace, the someone else was often the two brothers who had started as each other's only refuge. Which brings us to the fracture the tabloids loved most. One that didn't begin with a headline, but ended up powering all of them. Brothers divided. Harry and William's rift. They were once a unit. Two boys walking behind the same coffin, learning the same instincts. Scan the crowd, guard the private, brace for the flash. For a long time, that shared history felt unbreakable. Then duty diverged their paths. William grew into the heir, the man who must keep the structure standing no matter the weather. Harry became the spare, with enough freedom to ask out loud whether the structure is worth the cost. Those roles aren't just titles. They're gravitational pulls. Over years, they dragged the brothers into different orbits. From William's vantage point, compromise is not betrayal. It's oxygen. An heir can't fight every battle with the press, or the palace, or public opinion. He has to absorb, delay, and outlast. If Camilla's acceptance kept the monarchy steady, then acceptance became the job. Even personal discomfort could be folded into service. That's the calculation the future king is expected to make. Harry's calculus is different. He says endurance without honesty corrodes the inside, no matter how polished the outside looks. Where William sees a necessary relationship with the media ecosystem, Harry sees a carnivore that must be starved. Where William can rationalize the Crown's embrace of Camilla as institutional coherence, Harry feels the embrace as a second erasure of his mother. Two perspectives, both sincere, both incompatible. Add advisors, agendas, and the chessboard of palace operations, and the gap widens. Reports claim that private arguments spilled into the public sphere through selective briefings, making reconciliation harder with every news cycle. Harry alleges that the same machinery that lifted Camilla also hardened a narrative about him. Impulsive, fragile, unreliable. Meanwhile, William's public image held steady. Dutiful, prepared, composed. To Harry, that felt less like a coincidence and more like evidence that the system picks a favorite when stability is at stake. The result wasn't a spectacular blow-up so much as attrition. Slights that grew teeth, meetings that ended colder than they started, and a series of moments where each brother felt the other had chosen the institution over the relationship. William, in Harry's telling, chose silence to shield the crown. Harry chose speech to defend the people he loves. Both believe they are protecting family. Both believe the other has made it harder. The public, of course, was handed a menu of tidy narratives. The sensible heir versus the reckless spare. The modern rebel versus the steady statesman. Reality is messier. Two boys who needed the same thing, security, chased it down different roads. One trusted the fortress. One distrusted the fortress. The deeper tragedy is that each path made the other look like treason, and hovering over all of it is Camilla's ascent, which functions in Harry's story like a fixed star. For William, her acceptance is proof that the crown can adapt and endure. For Harry, it's proof that the crown will adapt at any human cost. That disagreement isn't just philosophical, it's personal. Because the moment a family member becomes a symbol, you stop arguing about the person and start arguing about what the person represents. By the time the brothers reached the stage of clipped smiles and careful choreography, the rift had become fuel for 100 headlines a week. Every joint appearance was treated like a pulse check. Every glance was a data point. And in the background, one question grew louder. If the brothers couldn't agree on what the monarchy should be, what chance did anyone else have? The answer, for Harry, appeared when another woman stepped into the frame, not as a symbol of adaptation, but as a catalyst for change. Meghan versus Camilla, clash of royalty image, two images. One crown, on one side, Camilla, years in the making, an emblem of compromise, careful pacing, and learned restraint. On the other, Meghan, instant global focus, unapologetically modern, and impossible to file under business as usual. That collision didn't need a public argument to become a conflict. It only needed the spotlight. From day one, Meghan represented acceleration, new energy, new audiences, new expectations about how a royal woman could speak and be seen. Camilla's rehabilitation, by contrast, was a long march of small steps. A patronage here, a light moment there, jokes that humanized, causes that soothed. The stories practically wrote themselves. One narrative built on patience, the other on velocity. And when those narratives met, the room tightened. Inside the institution, temperament matters as much as titles. Camilla learned to bend, to take the temperature, to keep the temperature. Meghan's instinct was different. Ask the question, name the pressure, open the window. Neither approach is immoral. Both carry a cost. Camilla paid hers early, in years of being cast as the villain, then enduring the slow work of reframing. Meghan paid hers quickly, in a barrage of scrutiny that arrived before the paint on the welcome sign had dried. According to commentators, that contrast became the media's favorite mirror. When Camilla was described as steady, Meghan was framed as disruptive. When Camilla was called private, Meghan was labeled strategic. Reports claim that behind the scenes, briefings and background guidance helped the comparisons along, sometimes gently, sometimes with a sting. Harry's view goes further. He believes that favorable framing for Camilla often coincided with harsher lines about Meghan. Two levers on the same console. That's his claim, and he repeats it because the pattern feels undeniable to him. Culture widened the gap. Meghan brought a perspective formed outside British aristocracy, a global celebrity toolkit, a sense that public work can be purpose-driven and plain-spoken. Camilla carried the traditional manual: don't fuel the story, outlast it. The first approach invites connection and pushback in equal measure. The second avoids fire but can look evasive in a transparent age. In practice, both women were playing different games on the same pitch. Harry saw the scoreboard and refused the terms. To him, Meghan's criticism wasn't a storm to be ridden out. It was proof that the system had learned nothing from Diana. He heard echoes, familiar insinuations, familiar caricatures, familiar silence where there should have been protection. Royal aides would counter that guarding the institution sometimes means avoiding engagement, that speaking less can shield everyone. Harry's answer is simple. It didn't shield his wife. Here, intent is the most difficult thing to prove and the easiest thing to feel. Did Camilla personally orchestrate every shift in coverage? The record can't show that. But Harry maintains that the survival tactics that elevated her, careful alliances with media, patience with optics, became the template by which others were measured. And when Meghan didn't fit the template, the system pushed back. The net effect? Two women turned into symbols. Camilla became shorthand for adaptation through compromise. Meghan became shorthand for change through confrontation. Symbols, once established, are hard to live under. Every outfit, every glance, every pause in a speech is recruited to confirm the myth. And once the myths harden, family disagreements stop being private disagreements. They become evidence. That is why this clash of images matters. It wasn't just about personalities. It was about the operating system of the monarchy itself, what it rewards, what it resists, and who pays when the code fails. Harry's verdict is that Meghan's treatment exposed the price of Camilla's acceptance. Peace purchased with someone else's storm. Critics say that's unfair. Supporters say it's overdue truth. Either way, the collision didn't stay contained to headlines. It migrated into the hallways, the meeting rooms, the space between two brothers who once moved as one. And that is where images become fractures. But a fracture inside a family is one thing. A fracture inside an institution is another. What happens when the strategy that keeps the crown shiny starts to hollow out the trust beneath it? The monarchy's collapse from internal division institutions rarely break with a bang. They thin from within. Tradition absorbs 1,000 small compromises until the fabric stops taking stitches. In Harry's telling, that is the real danger now. Not a single scandal, but a slow exchange of substance for surface. What looks like strength at the balcony can feel like silence at the dinner table. And silence, multiplied, becomes policy. Begin with the architecture. The monarchy runs on two fuels: continuity and consent. Continuity is logistics, succession, schedule, ceremony. Consent is feeling, public faith that the people inside the palaces are playing fair. When the machinery leans too hard on continuity, it is tempted to treat consent as a PR variable, something managed, not earned. That is the slope Harry describes. He says the family became a set of narratives to be maintained, rather than a set of people to be protected. Consider the internal weather. Staff factions, competing priorities, and years of living under the camera create a culture where avoiding embarrassment can outrank telling the truth. Leaks become valves. Spin becomes reflex. Reports claim that at times, stories are traded to cushion one blow by inflicting another. Even if that is only partly true, the perception corrodes trust. You can't build unity in a house where every room believes a corridor is listening. Camilla's acceptance sits at the center of his critique as a symbol. not a smoking gun. The crown, he argues, chose to prioritize stability, her steady presence beside the king, over reckoning with the grief that shaped his life. To supporters, that choice was leadership, a sovereign safeguarding the next chapter. To Harry, it looked like a bargain, comfort for the institution, cost for the spare. When Meghan entered, that calculus tightened, silence hardened. The difference between protection and presentation became the fault line. Outside, the public reads vibrations. Approval rises and falls. A polished ceremony can still stir pride. A sour headline can still plant doubt. The problem isn't one bad week. It's the authenticity gap, the sense that the crown will correct a narrative faster than it will correct an injury. Older admirers forgive the choreography. Younger audiences expect receipts. When expectations diverge, legitimacy frays. Meanwhile, the brothers, once the monarchy's living bridge, stand on opposite banks. William's duty is to keep the edifice upright. He trusts the tools that do that work. Harry's duty, as he sees it now, is to refuse any tool that harmed his mother and harms his wife. Neither role is villainous. Both are lonely, and between them, the oxygen of good faith gets thin. This is how collapse looks in Harry's frame. Not the crown tumbling, but the meaning behind it leaking away. A family that can't agree on what protection means. A press strategy that can deliver favorable optics while delivering private wounds. A public story so finely tuned that real life struggles to breathe beneath it. The rituals still impress. The rooms still glitter. But the glue, trust, dries and cracks. Critics will say he's overstating it. The monarchy has survived worse. Abdication, war, divorce, tragedy. True, but every era asks a different price. In a world that records everything, the cost of managing image without addressing harm grows heavier. The house can't be both fortress and family if those inside feel the fortress. Demands a loyalty tax payable in silence. And that brings us to the hinge of this entire narrative, the sentence Harry can't unsay and the institution can't ignore. If the problem is a culture of bargains, then someone has to be named as the emblem of that culture. In his story, that emblem is Camilla. Fair or not, proved or not, it's the verdict he carries. The question is what that verdict does next. Does it force a reckoning, or does it become another scar folded into the balcony smile? Either way, the next move isn't ceremonial. It's moral. And Harry is already at the microphone. Harry's final verdict. Camilla destroyed the family. It comes down to a sentence that can't be walked back. In Harry's telling, the damage wasn't a single blow. It was 1,000 quiet trades that ended with one woman crowned and one family cracked. He doesn't say it as a headline. He says it like a diagnosis. She destroyed us. Not fireworks, finality. What does he mean by destroyed? He isn't claiming the crown will vanish tomorrow. He's talking about the glue that makes the whole thing feel real. Trust, protection, fairness. In his view, Camilla's ascent required a years-long bargain with the same media machine that tormented his mother and targeted his wife. He believes reputations were bartered like chips, that praise for one figure often traveled with punishment for another, and that, over time, the family learned to live with that arithmetic. Once you price people, he argues, you lose them. Harry's verdict is rooted in memory as much as evidence. The nightmarish press chases of his childhood, the cold choreography of public life after Diana, the subtle shift from keep calm to keep control. Then Meghan arrives, and all the pattern recognition lights start flashing. To him, it is the same story in a new century. A woman he loves fed to a narrative so that the institution can prove it still knows how to manage a storm. Whether every exchange happened exactly as he believes is almost beside the point. He feels the consequences in his bones. That's what gives his charge its heat. Critics push back. They say Camilla did the slow, unfashionable work, showing up, supporting Charles, embracing causes without drama. and that the public eventually rewarded consistency. They add that every senior royal, Harry included, benefits from engagement with the press when it suits them. Both statements can coexist with Harry's anger. The conflict isn't about whether media strategy exists. It's about what gets sacrificed to make it work, and who gets chosen as the cost of doing business. The deeper sting for Harry is symbolic. Camilla isn't only a person. She's become, in his story, the emblem of the palace's deal with appearances. If the Queen's endorsement was the seal and the tabloids were the tool, then Camilla is, to him, the proof that image beat intimacy. He looks at the balcony and sees a victory for optics. He looks at the empty space beside him, the mother gone, the brother distant, and calls it a defeat for family. Is there a path back from a verdict like that? For institutions, time is the default answer. Stay steady, outlast the noise. But time can't repair what silence refused to treat. If Harry is right, the wound isn't public relations. It's private honesty. A real reckoning would require rules, not vibes. No trading family members for favorable coverage. No invisible briefings that set relatives on fire. Clear accountability when lines are crossed. Anything less, in his mind, is another layer of polish on the same crack.